entry flight control team depart its positions until that inflatable raft, the front porch, is erected, the hatch open, and the crew having exited the vehicle. So that's the next step in the recovery process that will lead to the hoisting of the crew members. For 2 crew members for each helicopter, they'll be hoisted to a pair of Navy helicopters that will then fly a short distance back to the USS John P. Murtha. What you're looking at is one of the fast boats circling the vehicle to make a hazard assessment. This is Mission Control Houston. Once again, you're watching the initiation of the recovery of the Artemis crew aboard Integrity. All of the Navy divers and the fast boats are now approaching the spacecraft after conducting a hazard assessment. The vehicle has been powered down. Entry Flight Director Rick Henfling now waiting for the life raft, the front porch, to be erected along the side of the vehicle so that the hatch can be opened and the crew members extracted from Integrity, soon to be hoisted one by one into a pair of Navy helicopters for a short flight back to the deck of the USS John P. Murtha. If you missed it earlier, we talked to Flight Dynamics and received a more official touchdown time or splashdown time, as it were, of 7:07 and 27 seconds p.m. Central Time, 5:07 and 27 seconds p.m. Pacific Time. That would equate to a mission elapsed time of 9 days, 1 hour, 32 minutes, and 15 seconds. Navy flight surgeon and other recovery personnel who have trained for several years for this recovery process. At this hour, some 41 minutes following splashdown, the vehicle has been powered down. There's no hazardous gas emanating from the vehicle. That's why the first team of recovery personnel has been able to pull alongside Integrity. And the reports continue to come in that the 4 astronauts are in excellent shape. Yes. This is Mission Control Houston, continuing to watch the initiation of the recovery of Integrity's astronauts. One by one, they'll be brought out of the spacecraft onto a large inflatable raft just a short time from now. In the meantime, we can go back to the USS John P. Murtha, where my colleague Megan Cruz is standing by to provide her situation report. Megan, can you hear us?
Hey, Rob. Yes, I can hear you. Thank you. Yeah, we're back here on the bow of the recovery ship where there are still plenty of people peering out into the water. We are not very far from the action everyone is seeing on their screen now. The Orion spacecraft, Integrity, in the ocean, surrounded by a number of recovery boats. As Rob has been saying, in those recovery boats, NASA and Navy personnel specifically trained to get the astronauts out of Orion. In some of our wide shots, you can probably see that there are 6 boats out in the water. More than 40 people out in the water right now on those boats. First order of business is to set up the front porch and the stabilization collar. You might also hear it referred to as a stab collar. Basically just to make sure that Orion stays upright, doesn't sway in the water too much, again, to make it easier for recovery forces to get the astronauts out. Again, we splashed down in the Pacific Ocean just after 5 p.m. Pacific time here. It's a requirement by NASA to be able to get the crew out of Orion within 2 hours of splashdown. So doing great on time so far. Plenty of time. No rush either. I was speaking to NASA flight surgeon Rick Schuring earlier in this broadcast, and he said to me, no rush to get the crew out. Just want to make sure that they're feeling good, and whenever they're ready to take their step out of Orion and onto that large raft, the front porch, folks will be ready. And as there are mission audio loops in Mission Control in Houston, there is a mission audio loop here on the ship, and it was just reported out that the side hatch is open. Side hatch of Integrity is open. You're getting these beautiful shots from our aerial assets. The ship itself, where I'm on, just 3,000 yards away. Again, plenty of people on the boat here, glued to the side closest to where they can see all this action. And again, with just 3,000 yards separating us, great views from the bow here. You can see now that side hatch is open. One of the Navy personnel is about to get inside there. In they go. In total, 4 will go into Orion. So it'll be a little bit of a tight squeeze, but the goal is to have a recovery personnel with each astronaut assessing them. Boat's getting closer now. Again, that one that's right up against Orion, those are the divers that will go in to the spacecraft to check on each of the astronauts. These other boats will begin doing a number of things, putting on that stabilization collar onto Orion, building that front porch. Eventually, they will retrieve the parachutes, as well as tow Orion back to the well deck of the recovery ship here. And so as we wait for the Navy and NASA personnel to get their assessment of the crew inside of Orion, why don't we toss it back to Rob for an update?
Yeah, thank you, Megan. Here in Mission Control, Flight Director Rick Henfling and the entry team of flight controllers still on duty. The vehicle has been powered down for some time now. There are no hazardous gases emanating from Integrity. That, of course, allowed the recovery personnel to approach the vehicle and then open the hatch to begin the initial medical assessment of the crew, as you just indicated. Now we're standing by for the erection of that inflatable raft, the front porch, alongside of the vehicle that will enable the crew to be extracted one by one onto the raft, have a moment or two to get their land legs back before they're hoisted into 2 hovering Navy helicopters, 2 crew members for each helicopter, for a short flight back to the deck of the USS John P. Murtha. All of Integrity's systems operated flawlessly throughout the course of the approach to the Earth, the entry into the Earth's atmosphere, and all of the key milestones that followed in this high-speed return to Earth for Integrity, a mission that spanned more than 694,000 miles from the vehicle's launch from the Kennedy Space Center atop the Space Launch System back on April 1st. As we mentioned at the top of the broadcast, the last time that the Apollo program saw a splashdown in the Pacific was Apollo 17 back on December 19th, 1972. So for the first time in some 53 and a half years, we have reenacted that with the arrival of Integrity's astronauts as they flew around the moon in that historic lunar flyby that began with a trans-lunar injection burn that took them out of Earth orbit following 24 hours of a high Earth orbit trajectory. The high Earth orbit trajectory enabled flight controllers here to have a full 24 hours to evaluate the systems on Integrity and the condition of the crew before they would commit to flying to the moon. With the side hatch of Orion having been opened to set the stage for the erection of the inflatable life raft, known as the front porch, to be erected alongside the spacecraft for the extraction of the crew. Let's play for you an interview that my colleague Megan Cruz conducted on the USS John P. Murtha with Navy diver First Class David McMahon that explains how this process is unfolding.
Okay, Davey, so you and some of your team, one last look over of the stabilization collar, correct?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay, so what is this stabilization collar?
This is what's going to stabilize the capsule out there in the ocean. We don't know how good the weather or the waves will be that day, so this will help prevent any unnecessary occurrences from happening, stabilizing the capsule and the astronauts inside.
So basically this is a float that will go around Orion. I'm assuming that what they're doing right now, these are the lines that will attach the collar onto Orion?
That is correct.
And so what are they doing here?
So we've got the lower line that will secure the inflation device before we inflate it. That gives us the go-ahead that it's secure in its space, and then we'll inflate it. And then once that is done, we'll undo all the carabiners and get this orange line on top tied in the same fashion. And then this will be secured to the capsule, and the astronauts can safely take their first steps out of the capsule onto the front porch.
Okay, and how long will it take them to set up the stabilization collar?
We should definitely be able to handle this in under 10 minutes.
Okay, wow. And then you just mentioned the front porch. So basically after they set up the stabilization collar, then they set up what's called the front porch here.
That's correct.
Okay, and what's the front porch?
Front porch is basically a bigger waiting room for the astronauts to sit in while we wait for the helicopters to show up and grab them.
Okay, so the medical team that was inside with the crew, they're going to help them out and onto the front porch?
That is correct.
And then what happens here?
We have higher trained medical personnel also on board the front porch that will give them lookovers and just make sure they're okay while we wait for the helicopters to show up.
Okay. How does it feel, I mean, your team, you, to be part of a mission that's returning astronauts from the moon in more than 50 years?
We all feel extremely honored to be a part of this, as well as a bigger mission for the Navy and joining up with NASA to do great things.
Mm-hmm. And do you feel like you and your team are ready?
Yes, very ready.
Cool. All right, thank you so much.
Thank you.
Once again, the recovery operations are continuing out in the Pacific. We shortly should see that life raft, the front porch, erected alongside the side hatch of the vehicle. A number of flight controllers have come into the flight control room to receive congratulations from Entry Flight Director Rick Henfling. But we're going to stick with our operations out in the Pacific as we await the extraction of the 4 crew members who are reported to be in excellent condition. Again, while we stand by for that front porch to be erected alongside of the side hatch of the vehicle, let's go back to the USS John P. Murtha and Megan Cruz. Megan?
Hey, Rob. Pausing now to listen to some internal audio loops. Again, the operations team here on the ship communicating with everyone out on the water. It seems like currents are hindering them a little bit from unfurling and inflating the stabilization collar as well as the front porch. But again, the requirement to get the crew out within 2 hours of splashdown, plenty of time. So no concerns just yet. But as calm as the water looks, yeah, it looks like it's hindering the teams just a tad. You can see in some of our shots that side hatch still open. Again, inside there are now 8 people inside. 4 divers, Navy divers, all with medical training, each assigned to an astronaut each. Making sure that they're comfortable, feeling good. As you've heard us say in the broadcast, you know, they expect a little bit of discomfort. Again, these astronauts just traveled back to Earth at 25,000 miles an hour, a nearly 695,000 mile journey around the moon. If you think you get carsick. Again, 6 boats out there, lots of gear with them, just in case, right? As we said, the crew reported feeling great, but again, all those folks out there in case they weren't, right? NASA is all about making sure we think about every situation that can happen, and so, of course, wanted to be ready in case any of our astronauts needed more medical attention while out there in the water. You see now teams, again, trying to set up the stabilization collar and front porch for the crew to get out of Orion. They need both, right? The stabilization collar will keep Orion from swaying as you see it is doing now. And then they will connect the front porch to the stabilization collar so that the crew can take 2 steps and they will be in the front porch. Not a lot of chatter on the mission audio loops. That's a good thing. Again, things proceeding pretty nominally, even if they're fighting some currents out there on the Pacific Ocean. Again, the goal, setting up the stabilization collar and the front porch so that the crew can rest comfortably in the front porch, get placed into harnesses so that 2 helicopters can lift them off the front porch and onto the USS John Murtha here. The helicopters are going to take turns picking up an astronaut. So again, Helo 1 and Helo 2. Okay, and the recovery team here on the ship just got a report from the undersea medical officer who is inside the capsule with the crew. He is reporting all 4 members are green. All of our 4 astronauts, Reed, Victor, Christina, Jeremy, green, meaning they are feeling great, not the complexion of their skin. They are feeling great, happy to be home, and ready to be extracted as soon as possible. And so, as I was saying, we have 2 helicopters circling the activity you're seeing on the water right now. Each will take turns picking up an astronaut. So Helo 1 will come on in, hover above the front porch, about 40 feet above the front porch. A Navy recovery specialist will be hoisted down into the front porch.
The restricted maneuvering doctrine is in effect.
We'll connect to the first astronaut, which we're expecting to be Christina. And then Helo 2 comes around, picks up Jeremy, while Helo 1 stays above head, and then Helo 1 will come back in for another astronaut, and then Helo 2 for the last astronaut, and then back to the flight deck here on the recovery ship. I was talking to Assistant Artemis Recovery Director Paul Sierpinski. He said helos are a much quicker, safer way to get on board. They did actually consider boats, but then if you think about it, longer time, the crew would have to move through more of the ship. This way the helos will give a more direct, quicker route to the medical bay for our 4 astronauts. Beautiful shots from our aerial and imagery teams. Clouds have dissipated for a clear view from the bow of the recovery ship here. You can still see divers in the water there. Encircling Orion, that is that stabilization collar we've been telling you about. As you saw in that interview just a few minutes ago, they have to first connect it to Orion, and then once it's secured onto Orion, they can inflate it, and then they'll further secure it with other harnesses and lines. About an hour and 10 minutes since splashdown in the Pacific Ocean here. Reed, Victor, Christina, and Jeremy back home after a history-making mission to the moon and back. If you missed what we said just a couple of minutes ago, the undersea medical officer inside with the crew in Orion reporting all 4 crew members feeling great. Progress being made there on the stabilization collar. It looks like they are beginning to inflate it. And it looks like they're starting to unfold the front porch in order to get that into the water here shortly and inflate that as well. Again, more than 40 people out in the water right now. And those Navy and NASA personnel have been in the water for now about 4 hours. The reason why they had to get out so early is just to stage everything. And actually here on the ship, when there are flight operations happening, you can't have anything else, right? Just because the flight deck can be a dangerous place, so they just want to focus on planes coming and going from the ship, so that's why they wanted to get the boats in the water to make sure that they have all the time they needed for the flight ops. And then the same crew here out in the water, they will stay out in the water for a number of hours after we recover the crew and get them back on the ship, because then they have to recover Orion. All right, that stabilization collar looking good around Orion. We're now seeing some recovery personnel getting on to that collar. Again, they need to further attach it to Orion to make sure that it can really prop up the spacecraft. It's basically lifting it up off of the water just a tad. Again, so it's not so...
Come off me for a minute.
So it doesn't sway so much in the water there. And now that front porch looks like it's nearly fully inflated as well. You can see a much larger surface area. And so once the crew get out of Orion, they can stretch their legs a little bit on this front porch, get some fresh air. And enjoy this beautiful day here on their home planet. It appears teams now are about to connect the front porch to the stabilization collar. And at that point, when both are secure, we should soon see astronauts come out of Orion. All these views you see also being fed to the Landing Force Operations Center here on the ship. Of course, it is very important for our recovery teams leading the mission to have all the views that you're seeing as well. Again, listening to their communication loop here on the ship. Very quiet, which is a good thing. It means things are going pretty nominally, meaning as expected. Again, all this activity happening just 3,000 yards away from the ship. So that means this will be a very quick flight back on the helicopters for the crew. 2-3 minutes, and then they'll be back here on the ship.
I know.
Okay, saw a thumbs up from one of the personnel on the front porch. It looks like they are now getting ready to deploy what they call the Air Rescue Vest, ARV. And so this is the harness that each crew member will get into in order to be hoisted into the helicopters. Again, those helicopters hovering just about 40 feet above the front porch when they're ready to pick up each crew member.
This is Mission Control Houston. Behind me, a fairly raucous scene as hundreds of flight controllers have poured into the flight control room here. This is reminiscent of the scene after the final shuttle mission of STS-135, although that was the end of a program. This is only the beginning of a program with the textbook splashdown of Integrity and its 4 astronauts. We're standing by for the crew to be extracted from the spacecraft. Entry Flight Director Rick Henfling invited all of these flight controllers who have contributed to this mission to enter the flight control room to have an opportunity to receive well wishes and to share the mutual glow that exists in the wake of a textbook mission for Integrity. On the front screen here in Mission Control, a sign that says "Welcome Home, Integrity," taking humanity back to the moon, going further, and returning safely to Earth. So all of that jubilation, part of the post-splashdown activities, even as we await the crew being extracted from the vehicle to be hoisted onto Navy helicopters for the trip back to the USS John P. Murtha. Once again here in Mission Control, this view of the Artemis flight control room, known as the White Flight Control Room. This is the old shuttle flight control, and now is the home of Artemis missions to the moon and beyond. Once again, quite a few flight controllers were invited in by Entry Flight Director Rick Henfling to share in the jubilation following the successful splashdown of Integrity. That splashdown occurring an hour and 22 minutes ago, as we stand by for the completion of the extraction of the crew, and ultimately they're hoisting onto Navy helicopters for a short flight back to the USS John P. Murtha. Splashdown occurred at 7:07 and 27 seconds p.m. Central Time. I had an opportunity to talk to the head of flight dynamics, Jeff Birch, a moment or two ago. He said the trajectory of Integrity coming through the Earth's atmosphere was so precise, they've never seen anything line up on a ground track like today's entry by Integrity for its splashdown southwest of San Diego. And the initial, you can hear it. Jubilation here in the flight control room. The first crew member is out of Integrity. We are expecting the other crew members momentarily to be extracted. We now have 2 crew members out. Two crew members out, 2 to go. We're about 1 hour from sunset out in the Pacific. Everything continues to go well. Integrity's systems function perfectly during its entry back to Earth. And Reed Wiseman, the commander who will be last out of the vehicle, reported that all the crew members were feeling very well. Crew member number 3 now out. And now standing by for the commander, Reed Wiseman, who will be last out of his ship. Bobbing in the Pacific under almost ideal conditions, Integrity spanned 694,000 miles during its journey from launch to splashdown. And we now have Reed Wiseman out of the vehicle, all 4 crew members now out of Integrity. Once again, all 4 crew members now on the front porch, and the procedure to begin hoisting them up to these 2 Navy helicopters hovering overhead will begin shortly. This is Mission Control Houston. The mission is over, but the melody lingers on as jubilation continues here in the flight control room. We should be expecting NASA's Associate Administrator, Amit Kshatriya, to be joining us shortly for a short interview while the recovery operations continue out in the Pacific. So we'll stand by for that. And then we'll turn it back over to Megan Cruz aboard the USS John P. Murtha.
We did this before 53 years ago, and that I mean it is a reasonable thing to contemplate, like what's gone on since then. And what I'd tell you is when we did Apollo, which again, the more we learn about what they did, the more magical it seems what they were able to accomplish given the technology and the learnings that they had. But when we did Apollo, the architects of Apollo, Gilbert, Seaman, von Braun, Mueller, what they really wanted to do, as they were contemplating what it meant to expand our range of action to the lunar surface, what they wanted to do was learn how to live and work in space for a long time. They wanted to do that first before they were confident they could expand their range of action to the moon. Now, of course, the politics of the time and the mission at the time was different, and so they had to go straight to the moon and bring people home. And then after that, the program kind of lost its momentum. But after that, NASA kept moving along those paths, right? So we recognized during Apollo that reusability was going to be important. We spent a lot of money on those machines, and we spent a lot of money on these machines here. But we recognized that reusability was important, which is why we built a winged space plane called Space Shuttle, and then we used that reusable machine to build a space station. And we learned for 25 years how to live and work in space, and have been able to develop technologies that can enable exploration. So really, what I think is now, 53 years later, we're at the point where the architects of Apollo would have been pleased that we're now ready to actually go back to the moon and go back to stay, because we've learned all the things we needed to learn.
There's a lot of people pleased here tonight, and we really thank you for joining us. Amit Kshatriya, NASA's Associate Administrator, as we begin to hoist the crew onto the helicopters to head back to the recovery ship. Thank you very much.
Thank you,
congratulations, Amit. This is Mission Control Houston, with the crew members now beginning to be hoisted aboard the Navy helicopters. Let's go to Megan Cruz aboard the USS John P. Murtha, who will take it from here.
Hey, Rob. Yeah, back on the bow of the ship here, we are seeing the helicopters circling Orion. The first one there having just completed picking up the first astronaut. Helo 2 now hovering just 40 feet above the front porch, lowering a recovery specialist out of the helicopter. That person will touch down in the front porch just there. The crew members already outfitted with a harness that will allow them to quickly attach to the hoisting device. Look at the power of those blades throwing water out at the center there, the front porch, with now 3 astronauts and the recovery specialists. Again, crews already outfitted with a harness vest. And here we go. Second astronaut now off the front porch, getting hoisted into the second helicopter. That helicopter will now hover just a distance away to give room for the first helicopter to come back and pick up the third astronaut. As we wait for that helicopter to come back, make its way back around, just want to mention that the President of the United States called our NASA administrator today while he was on the ship, just minutes after we interviewed him live on our coverage, and congratulated him and NASA on this history-making moment tonight. Helicopter 1 again hovering 40 feet over the front porch. We will soon see another recovery specialist getting lowered onto the front porch. Wow, imagine sitting on that front porch, the wind, the water. But again, the recovery team determined that a helicopter flight back to the ship here would be safer, faster, and more comfortable for our crew, who just completed a 10-day mission around the moon. Third astronaut in the air, getting hoisted quickly back into the first helicopter now. That first helicopter now on its way back to the ship here. We will soon see it land in just a few minutes. Again, all this action happening just 3,000 yards away from us, so a very quick flight back to the flight deck. And now the only person left on the front porch, Commander Reed Wiseman. That second helicopter now making its way back over to the front porch. Here it comes. Making its final approach here. The last astronaut, Commander Reed Weissman, now off the front porch and almost into the second helicopter. Both now on their way back to the ship where we are, the USS John P. Murtha, just west of San Diego in the Pacific Ocean. Exciting to see our 4 crew members minutes away from landing on the flight deck here on the recovery ship. 550 people on this ship, excited, ready, anxious, looking forward to welcoming this crew aboard. Watching them now with our own eyes. Close to the ship here. Hearing them begin to hover on the flight deck, which is just across from us, here on the bow. The first helicopter coming in. And wheels down. Wheels down of the first helicopter carrying 2 of our Artemis II crew. Pilot Victor Glover and mission specialist Christina Cook. Helo 1 on deck reported on the recovery loop. Again, the mission audio loops that the recovery team are using here to communicate with one another. And an announcement just made on the ship, integrity incoming. 2 more helicopters on their way to the flight deck, one carrying the crew, the other, one of our imagery helicopters. Again, kudos to our imagery and aerial teams for giving us these beautiful views of history in the making. Set amid a gorgeous, soon-to-be sunset here in the Pacific Ocean. Second helicopter making its approach of the flight deck. Plenty of people here on the bow with their cell phones out, filming this moment. Some impressive flying here by the Navy as we are seconds away from wheels down. And there you go. We now have all 4 Artemis II crew members on the USS John P. Murtha. I'm sure they're happy to be out of the water and on this recovery ship with, again, 550 people on board, ready to welcome them home. But first, as we've been saying throughout the broadcast, just making sure the crew feel good. We reported that they were feeling good when they were in Orion, but those were just initial, quick, verbal assessments of how they're feeling. Their destination tonight, the medical bay here on the ship, right after we power down the helicopters here. The team on the flight deck working quickly but methodically. Waiting for just one more helicopter to touch down. Very limited personnel here on the flight deck.
Restricted maneuvering doctrine is in effect.
As that third helicopter touches down.
The ship is at flight quarters. Stand clear of wader decks, aft of frame 095. Burn no cover stop side. Thrown articles over the side. Hold all trash and garbage on station. Flight quarters.
While just a few folks on the flight deck itself, there are plenty more on some upper decks. I see in some of our views a very packed crowd overhead. Announcements being made over the ship's loudspeaker system, reminding folks to stay clear of operational areas like the flight deck, so that teams can work quickly to get the crew off of the helicopters and into the medical bay. Splashdown today, 5:06 p.m. Pacific time. We are within 2 hours of that splashdown time, and already we have all 4 crew members on the flight deck of the USS John P. Murtha. Again, crew waiting before getting out for the helicopters to completely shut down. Safety, of course, very important to NASA and the U.S. military. So we'll wait just a couple of minutes here before we start seeing crew members walk off the helicopters one by one. All right, and now here we see pilot Victor Glover and mission specialist Christina Cook sitting on the edge, of one of the helicopters looking in great spirits. That familiar smile and laugh from Victor, I can see it from here. Christina, I'm sure, feeling the same way, just blocked a little bit by our camera here, but we'll see her here shortly. A photographer taking their pictures. Victor saluting folks on the flight deck. They look like they're in great spirits. Happy to be home, I'm sure. If you're sitting at home, I hope you too are wondering, what would you want to ask them if you got a chance to talk to them? Because that is what I'm thinking about. Getting the opportunity to talk to or ask questions of these 4 astronauts who just made history as the first crew to return to the moon since 1972. Oh, there we see Christina there, also smiling, finally peering out, waving at the cameras. Hello to you too, Christina, yes. Welcome back. Welcome, welcome home. A loudspeaker announcement on the ship saying, "Welcome home, Integrity." Victor in great spirits. I can't see who he's talking to, but I kind of think that he might be talking to his other 2 crew members. Shouting from across the flight deck, congratulations to one another. And so now we see some Navy personnel walking up to the helicopter. This is again the first helicopter carrying pilot Victor Glover and mission specialist Christina Cook. Both have taken off their helmets now. Some pictures, video to catalog this historic moment. A beautiful sunset just behind them here in the Pacific Ocean. Golden hour. These pictures will be beautiful. Now we see NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman. He is on the flight deck, as well as Flight Surgeon Rick Schuring walking over to Victor and Christina first. We saw the administrator walk over to the other helicopter, which is carrying Commander Reed Weissman and Mission Specialist Jeremy Hansen. We heard from Rick earlier in the broadcast. Again, he said he's going to be out there on the flight deck to do another initial assessment of the crew, ask them how they're feeling, anything bothering them. But again, from what I'm seeing, they look like they're in great spirits and feeling pretty good for folks who just traveled 695,000 miles from Florida to the moon and now here to the Pacific Ocean. We're now seeing NASA Administrator Jared Isaacman walking across the flight deck. He had been talking to Reed and Jeremy, now approaching Victor and Christina. A hug from Victor, a hug from Christina. What a moment that we're getting to experience together. I'm sure congratulatory words. You know, we got to speak to the administrator live on this broadcast as well, and he said the kid in him right now, giddy, absolutely giddy at what we were able to accomplish today. Returning them home safely and in good spirits after a 10-day mission around the moon. And here we go. We're seeing Jeremy walking, waving across the flight deck, now on his way to the medical bay. It's a short walk, less than a minute. Again, that's why the recovery team decided to use helicopters to get them on the flight deck for that short walk to medical bay. And now on the flight deck, we see the chief of the astronaut office, Scott Tingle. Rick Schuring switching places. He's going over to the other helicopter. Big hugs from Victor, Christina to Scott. Again, a gorgeous sunset setting the stage for this recovery tonight. All right, and now here we are, Christina, making her way, looking thankful, grateful, happy to be home. You can see she's looking up. Again, lots of people, just a few levels up off the flight deck, welcoming her home. Scott holding the door like a gentleman, but back on his way to the other crew still on the flight deck. So still on the flight deck, Victor Glover and Reed Weissman. It looks like Victor will be the next one headed to medical bay. More hugs, more hugs. He's a hugger. Victor looking good as he walks across the flight deck. NASA administrator applauding. Victor applauding for all the folks on the ship with him who played a role in their safe return today. And finally, just one Artemis II crew member left on the flight deck, Commander Reed Weissman. Applause from the group there on the flight deck, I'm sure, as well as on the level just above them, packed with people. Reed looking good as he takes his steps towards the medical bay. See our 4 Artemis II crew members back on the ship. Again, now they will